The documentary Surviving Ohio State has been making news since it was first announced in 2022. The film, directed by Academy Award winner Eva Horner, is currently running on HBO and its streaming service HBO Max. Here is the trailer for the film.
Growing up in Ohio, everyone wants to be a Buckeye.
That was the dream.
Ohio State's athletic department is the gold standard for college sports.
The Buckeyes are a religion.
Dr. Strauss was our team doctor, and he's the one we went to.
Richard Strauss was the esteemed doctor of sports medicine at Ohio State.
We walk into a room, and Doc tells me to turn the lights off.
And who are you going to tell?
There was a dirty little secret that we tiptoed around, and we just dealt with it.
He was in such a position of power because if they didn't go through his exam, they did not compete.
Our coaches knew.
It's truly amazing how many people had to look the other way for him to get away with this that long.
The wheels came off. I was never the same person.
How could these grain-fed tough guys be the victims of sexual assault?
As more people come forward, Ohio State decided to investigate themselves.
177 survivors was a small fraction of the true number. It's in the thousands.
I decided accountability needed to be had.
Behind the scenes, they begin fighting us tooth and nail.
They want to keep spending money to fight us, and then we'll keep going.
You know, somebody asked one time, and I thought, you know what? I'm a survivor of sexual assault, but I'm a victim of OSU.
Dr. Richard Strauss, who died by suicide in 2005, has been accused of abusing hundreds of student athletes at Ohio State University from 1978 to 1998. But the scandal didn't really come to light until 2018 when a complaint was filed with the university. Ohio State has reached settlement agreements worth more than $60 million with 296 survivors of Strauss abuse, but many more remain. Additional plaintiffs have cases working through the systems today. I'm joined today with the lead plaintiff and whistleblower, Michael DeSabato. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate you having me.
So let's get into it. As we talk about this and surviving Ohio State, you know, culture for me is a big thing, right? There's a culture in everything we do. There's a culture in our family. There's a culture in our companies. There's a culture in a sports athletic team. What was it like growing up as a DeSabato in the Ohio State world? Because the DeSabato name in Ohio is wrestling royalty, right? You have 6 brothers in the DeSabato family total, correct?
There's 6 of us, yes.
And you have 11 state championships among the 6 brothers. So what was it like growing up a DeSabato?
Well, again, thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, it was many positive thoughts when I think about growing up on the west side. I grew up on the west side of Columbus. I'm one of 9 children. My mom and pops ran a small business on the west side. My father was an entrepreneur. We owned I call it a pizza pub today. It was a restaurant that my pops opened up in 1960. It was right down the street from the General Motors plant. And so we grew up and worked in the kitchen. We have one of the better pizzas in the state of Ohio, I like to say. And so I grew up in a working class, West Side, tough family. My mom and dad were salt of the earth folks, Italian Catholic. They got us into the sport of wrestling at a young age. Our Uncle Bob was kind of the Yoda of Central Ohio wrestling, affected so many lives. He wrestled at Ohio State in the mid 40s. We had a lot of love, and we also had, a big sports family. We loved wrestling. There's chaos too. 9 of us. Think about that, Frank. Raising 9 kids and being an entrepreneur and doing that, small business entrepreneur. Yeah, it's a blessing. Very proud of the family and what we were able to accomplish. And my brother Luke wrestled at Notre Dame. So there's 2 of us, 2 DeSabatos wrestled at Notre Dame and 7 at Ohio State. So I grew up around Ohio State athletics as well.
You had to be pretty damn tough to be, in a family with 9 kids. Like, toughness, I imagine, and courage were very, very important, I would have to imagine.
We were fighters. I mean, the west side of Columbus was a blue-collar, tough, hard-nosed, tough kids. There were a lot of fights, scraps. My brother Adam and I, we were very close together. I can recall many times that we settled our differences with our hands. A very competitive environment, loving but competitive. Very blessed.
So the DeSabatos, they all end up going to Ohio State, correct?
There's 6 in my family. 5 of us went to Ohio State. My brother Luke went to Notre Dame.
Okay. So the family bleeds scarlet and gray, right? Like, you guys are a die-hard Ohio State family.
Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, and being, we idolized Ohio State athletics, and Archie Griffin, and was our childhood hero. We bleed scarlet and gray. I mentioned earlier there's 36 varsity O's in my family, and I didn't know anything other than love for Ohio State athletics and Ohio State football, wrestling. Again, it's part of our DNA.
Yes, it is. And I'm sitting, and when I watched the film for the first time, I'm sitting there and having being in the wrestling community, obviously knowing people involved, and I watched this film, and I'm just sitting there getting frustrated, and I start getting a little bit angry, all right, and a little bit bothered by the fact, and then it just only escalates even more and more and more. And look, this isn't a hard news show that we're doing here today, but what made me stand up and say, boy, I want to talk to Michael DeSabato and have him come on, was I watched it on a Saturday evening, and then the very next morning in our church service, we're going over the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew, and we're talking about the Beatitudes. Blessed are those that, blessed are those, and blessed are those who have a hunger and thirst for righteousness, and doing the right thing. And it just hit me, and I was like, that documentary last night, that's not right. Like, what's going on and what's happening, it isn't the right thing, and it made me want to reach out. And so, first off, again, thank you for coming on. But that's something that, for you, I would imagine had to be extremely challenging, because here you are, you're a fighter. You're a fighter, and standing up for what is right is something that is in your heart, right? That comes from your culture of being a DeSabato. How difficult was it for you to come forward and be the main whistleblower, the one to bring this whole thing to light?
It was difficult. It was difficult. I didn't expect how difficult. I knew I just was always able to, and part of my history is to stand up and say things that most people won't say as it relates to abuse of power. And so, I'd researched issues of substance abuse and sexual assault within the student athlete population. And that was something that I felt, was important from my experience, and it kind of led to, understanding, that environment and why student athletes were 6 times more likely to commit sexual assault than non-student athletes, and why they were more likely, 6 or 7 times more likely to binge drink. And then you put the two together, and so I've always looked at my my experience and wanted to stand up and try to address and make my team better. How this came to light, Frank, is I was 2017, December 2017. I was sitting with Mark Coleman, the former UFC heavyweight champion, UFC Hall of Famer, who I wrestled with at Ohio State. Mark and I were we came into Ohio State at the same time in 1986, and Mark and I were sitting. I think we were sitting at his apartment, and he was reading I think he was reading the USA Today at the time, and he was interested in. He was following the Larry Nassar case very closely because his daughter was an elite level gymnast at the time. So, I had known about the Nassar case, but when you looked at the details of what was going on at Michigan State, it just hit me. There was, Larry Nassar was performing unnecessary genital exams on female athletes. And so when I heard Mark, describe that, what was going down at Michigan State, it hit me, straight in the face. I said, Mark, that's us. That's the same thing that Strauss did at Ohio State. So I stepped back from that. I was like, wow, that's us. And I over the next 2 months, I spoke to my teammates and close friends, and just wanted to confirm, their experience were the same experiences that I had. And sure enough, I knew what I was going to get. It was just confirmation that this is what happened at Ohio State. So in March of 2018, I approached the university. I sat down in a conference room with 4 or 5 folks from the university. Their HR people, their lawyer. I had a friend of mine who actually played basketball at Michigan. He sat in the meeting. I wanted someone to be there to support me when I did this. And I told the university, the folks in the room, that this is what happened at Ohio State. And again, at the time, I was, let's call it naive, or let's call it naive. I didn't expect. I was hopeful that we would get closure quickly. That they would recognize that this happened, would own it, and given what happened at Michigan State, follow the lead and work with us to settle this in a manner that brought justice to the victims. And 7 years later, here we are. Still, there's folks, teammates, and several hundred guys still in federal court with the university, and it's been a traumatic ride, as you may imagine. The film for me was a watershed moment because it provided clarity and vindication. It's one thing to read, on the internet, a story about what went down, but now for the first time, there was a film, hour and 50 minutes, that you could sit down and understand the story from start to finish.
Sure.
So that to me was liberating, and it's provided some peace for me, and I know it's provided peace for the guys in the film. What a remarkable group of guys. There's 9 of us that stepped forward and sat in front of a camera. Hollywood, Academy Award-winning director Eva Orner, and spilled their guts and had the courage to stare in a camera and say, I was sexually abused as a student athlete at Ohio State. These are elite male athletes. For the first time in the history of the world, you saw, elite male athletes say, me too.
Right.
And I know that's provided, we're changing the way folks look at sexual abuse. It can happen. It does happen all the time.
What do you think, like, why do you think it took so long for those dots to connect?
You know, where did this all start? And maybe, you know, one of the key pivotal moments as a society, as you know, in the United States, was Anita Hill, and when she testified in front of Congress about sexual harassment. And so that was really one of the first, you know, big conversations that we had as a country about, you know, sexual misconduct. And I think there was another watershed moment where Oprah had sat down and discussed how she was sexually abused as a child. And then you got the Me Too movement. But if you look back at it, Frank, and you look at the Catholic Church and you look at the Boy Scouts and victims from those scandals, and you look at the research, and most victims of sexual abuse, male sexual abuse, don't come forward until they're in their 50s. Wow. Because they don't, you know, it's hard to say, hey man, I was sexually abused as a man. It's one thing, there's a stigma, there's a stigma with sexual abuse in particular, but it's less, you know, but it's less so male on female, or when you look at male on male, especially elite male athlete on, you know, in our situation, you know, there's people can't wrap their mind around it. You know, how could these, you know, elite male athletes, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, how could these guys be sexually abused? And the film does a great job of explaining, you know, the power dynamics that were involved. The gymnasts in Michigan State were sympathetic. Mm-hmm. You know, people got it. The situation in Ohio State, you know, one of the things the film does well is you see the testimony of Allie Reisman and these gymnasts at Michigan State, and they're telling their stories. When you take that story, you listen to their story, and then you hear the testimony of the 9 guys in the film. Frankly, it's exactly the same. I mean, we'd go in for, you know, I went in once. I had dislocated my pinky, and it's sitting out on top of it. I went down to the training room, and Doc Strauss was down there, and he you know, put it back in place, and you know, I was going to, you know, get it taped up, and he wanted to do a genital exam, and I'm like, in the middle of practice, and this was you know, this happened on a daily basis for 20 years at the university. It was an open secret, let's call it. Everyone knew that he was performing these genital exams unnecessarily. Everyone knew that he was doing unnecessary prostate exams, and everyone knew that he was taking showers with the team, not just our team, but 6 to 7 teams a day. He would be in our shower, you know, soaping himself excessively. He just was he was a pedophile. You know, he was an active, and it was a daily thing for him. You know, one thing that the movie doesn't address as much as I had hoped is the environment that we were training in, and Larkins Hall. This was a recreation facility that housed, you know, many different sports. And so you got to imagine, we'd come down, our locker room was in our showers and sauna, we shared with the general student population, and professors and administrators could come into our facility and take showers with us on a daily basis. And they did. So, you know, if you're a deviant predator, you know, at the university, you could show up every day at 3:30 when the wrestlers are coming down from practice and prey on them. You know, that was the culture that we, you know, were forced to train in. And so you add Strauss into that, you know, he's one of many predators, but then he has access. He had a locker in our locker room, He had a locker in up to 6, 7 different locker rooms across campus. He would go from wrestling to gymnastics to soccer to swimming. He was, he was everywhere. And
Wow.
yeah, it's a tragedy.
Well, it makes me question, how can you be successful in that environment, right? I mean, like, here you are, you're a student athlete. You're at the Ohio State University. Your job is to, number one, you're there to go to school, right? Number two, you're there to get an education or compete. Education number one, compete number two. In the sport, in Division I Big Ten wrestling, which is the absolute #1 conference in America. And so, and now you have to deal with all these additional, things that are going on. I imagine it had to be an extremely stressful, toxic environment to be a part of.
Despite all that, we still achieved at a high level. I mean, when I was there, and our 86 class, I mean, I think we went from the bottom half of the Big Ten to finishing third, fourth, and third in the country. I competed with guys like Kevin Randleman and Mark Coleman. My brother Adam was the first 3-time NCAA All-American at Ohio State. So we achieved despite the environment. I talk about this environment, we'd go into the saunas on a daily basis, and there'd be 5, 6 dudes in there that were there every day, and they were there to watch you sweat, watch you take a shower. And at one point in the late 90s, there was an incident in the shower, in the locker room, in the sauna, where an athlete, said something to what turned out to be a professor who was there every day, and threatened him. He said, "If you don't stop looking at me, I'm gonna hurt you." Something of that nature. The professor went to the university administrators and complained that he was threatened by athletes, and the wrestling team, despite they know what this environment is, the wrestlers were forced to go to sensitivity training. Hellickson's on the record with this, that he would, when recruits would come into Ohio State to walk the facility, he would do a circle around the Larkins to make sure there wasn't anything deviant happening, because he wanted to make sure that the student, that the athlete and their parents didn't see something crazy.
Can you imagine that?
Which there's an issue. Just to think about that. You're a head wrestling coach, and you've got to worry about what they're going to see. And the other thing I'll mention is, because we came forward at Ohio State in July. This was March of 2018. In July of 2018, a wrestler at University of Michigan sent a letter to their athletic department, saying that the same stuff that was going on in Ohio State was going on at Michigan. And there was a lawsuit. Andy Rovott, who wrestled at St. Edwards, was part of that initial group that came forward. And they had the same thing happening at Michigan that was at Ohio State. And in their case, it was 30 years of abuse.
Wow.
The doctor up there, his name was Dr. Anderson. He had access to the entire Michigan athletic department athletes. He operated right under Bo Schembechler. He was the main doctor. Strauss mainly focused on non-revenue sports. At Michigan, Anderson had access to the who's who of Michigan athletics, and he was doing this for 30 years. The same thing: unnecessary genital exams, unnecessary prostate exams. He wasn't showering with the athletes, but those, that there was that kind of abuse. And so Michigan athletes followed us. There was over 1,000 guys at Michigan that filed suit against the university. In 2022, Michigan athletes settled for, I think, almost $650 million. So it wasn't just us. There's also a case at Indiana right now that's still in motion. A doctor over there named Bamba, who was doing the same thing, unnecessary genital and rectal exams, under Bobby Knight, and the basketball program at Indiana. We all know about Michigan State, obviously. Penn State had their issues with Sandusky. So, the culture of cover-up and abuse across the Big Ten and frankly across the country is something that we need to speak about. I tell people, please watch the film.
Please watch the film. Yes, you have to watch the film.
Haven't watched it's hard to watch.
It is,
but it's impossible to ignore.
100%.
If you're a parent, if you're a human being, and you watch that film, and you don't scream, you need to look in the mirror. Why? And I hope this film is viewed, and it's going to be there for forever.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first. Documentaries typically, I heard you say, don't go to #1, right? But this has been #1 for how long? How long was it #1?
It debuted within 24 hours on HBO Max. It was #1 within 24 hours, and it stayed #1 for almost 10 days. And again, documentaries, I'm told, do not, penetrate the top 10.
Right.
So it's definitely captivated. It's I know HBO, and I know the directors, pleasantly not surprised, but just, grateful that, we've gotten the attention that we've gotten so far. It's going to be watched and rewatched, and the conversation is just beginning.
Tell me about your participation in the film. How big of a role did you play in it?
Well, the director reached out to me in 2022, early 2022. Eva Orner she's an Academy Award winning director, and she's Australian, and she just had a way of I just was I felt comfortable speaking to her right away. She had done some films that were similar to this, one about the abuse within the Bikram yoga community, which was one of her it was an excellent film as well, talking about the abuse by the man who this Bikram who founded that that yoga style. So she reached out, and Frank, I wasn't in a good place in 2022. I was there mental health struggle. At the time, I was, as you can imagine, being the whistleblower is not easy. I was up and down. I was diagnosed in 2018 bipolar disorder, which I didn't realize. I was actually diagnosed, back in I think I had my first depressive episode in early 2000s. I think when my father died in 2002 was my first bout of depression. So I dealt with depression. I wasn't diagnosed correctly, and I was on an antidepressant that was actually making my mania worse. So in 2018, I was diagnosed. I was just from 18 to really the last 7 years have been, up and down and trying to, find a place that was where I was healthy. And again, this last 12 months of, having the support of this film has changed a lot in my life. And so Eva came in 2002. She interviewed me. At the time, my wife and I said, I don't want to be the focus of this. I just wasn't in a good space, and so she was so good with all of us. She gained the trust of not just me, but she spoke to hundreds of athletes that were affected by this and did the research. And it took her 3 years, to 3 years to go from, initial conversations sitting down with us in our homes to actually when it was debuted in June of this past year. One of the things I think that was happening is there was a lot of legal stuff behind the scenes that HBO had to navigate to make sure that they were telling a story in a way that that was conducive to not being sued.
What's one of the biggest takeaways from the film that maybe you didn't see before it was made, that after it was made, that maybe opened your eyes, or that you took away from it?
When people say, "Oh, why didn't you just kill, hit this guy or whatnot?" Strauss was sedating athletes and raping them. There's over 170 cases where of alleged rape. That's just the ones that reported it. So think about it's crazy. So the biggest takeaway is, here these athletes stepping forward and staring in a camera and telling the truth, even though it's obviously painful to relive. I think that's the biggest thing I take away from this is, wow, these guys. It amazes me today, that here we are, and again, because these guys step forward, we're making a difference in the world. I know that.
You're a pathfinder, Mike. I mean, to go and do what you've done and to put your foot out on the ledge and jump into this when you're probably going to be persecuted, right? You're probably, people are going to throw anything and everything they can at you, slam you, slander you in all ways. But leadership means leading, right? It's leading from the front, not from the back. And I commend you. I just think, to come out and to say, this happened and let's not bury this. Because think about all the people that have, you probably had no clue the numbers of people that experienced, being preyed upon and being, taken advantage of in these situations. I went down there in 1996 on a recruiting trip, and I heard about it, and it was one of the reasons I didn't want to go there, and because talk was out there about this, and but it seemed like it was something that was swept under the rug, maybe.
I had heard the stories dating back to my brothers, back in the late 70s, early 80s. They had talked. And actually, my first experience with Strauss was as a 14-year-old at Bishop Reed High School. I was a freshman in high school, and Strauss, again, how he found ways to be in a position to abuse. And one of the ways that he did it was he used to do this is in the early days of body fat testing. So he would come to the high school, and we'd go into the coach's office, which was a small little room, and you'd have to take your clothes off in front of him, and he's pinching your side and your butt and your cheek and this, and he's giving you a general exam. Now, think about that, Frank. He had access to our entire state wrestling. We were one of the powerhouses in the state of Ohio and one of the biggest programs in the country, and each of us had to walk into a room and be subjected to this kind of craziness. But again, it was kind of joked about. Well, that's just Strauss, being Strauss. Hellickson at one point is on tape saying he approached Strauss and said, Doc, you're making the guys nervous taking showers with them. And Strauss said, well, Coach, you take showers with them also. And Hellickson's response, but yeah, not for an hour. So everyone knew. Didn't know how to handle it then. And Frank, the most disappointing part of this, for not just me, for guys, Mike Schick and Dan Ritchie, and we had a close relationship with Russ and Jim Jordan, and again, Russ was taking complaints to the university regularly, and Andy Geiger, is the former athletic director, is on the record with the Washington Post saying just that. Russ was complaining about Larkins. He was complaining about Strauss taking showers. Uh, so he was reporting it, and Geiger said we mishandled it. He owned, that portion of it. What's the most disturbing and unfortunate and disappointing piece is here we are in 2025, and those two guys, Russ and Jim Jordan, have ghosted us, and it's just unnecessary. I look at Jim. I don't want to pile on anyone, but let's say you didn't know. 2018, the university conducts their own investigation, and it's overwhelming, the amount of evidence. The university admits that this went down, and yet the guy that's in Washington, D.C., who we trained with, is not using his platform to help us get justice. Where's the honor? Where's the leadership? You mentioned leadership. We believed, in these guys as leaders. We followed them. They taught us, there was a culture, honor and integrity and discipline and all these things that we were taught as student athletes. And yet here we are in 2025. Where's integrity? Where's honor? Where's truthfulness? And where's standing up to power? Where are we? Where are some of these folks? And so that's been one of the difficult things to swallow, is that piece of it.
Why do you think that is?
First, the stigma. The stigma of male on male sexual abuse. It's hard for if you're a Jim Jordan, you're in Congress, and these allegations come out, and frankly, just for the record, Frank, I approached both Russ and Jim before I came forward in March of 2018, and I told them, this is what I'm going to do, and because I had respect, that I maintained, relationship with both Russ and Jim dating back, 20 years to when I was an athlete. And so I just said, here, I'm going to do this. And Russ initially was supportive. He sat down in June of 2018 and actually did an interview with me. It was like 51 minutes of testimony, and where he discusses in detail the issues in Arkansas, the issues with Strauss, and supporting us. And then that was like last week of June of 2018, July 3rd of 2018, NBC News does a story. They call Jordan. He denies any knowledge of what was going on at Ohio State and Arkansas and Strauss, and then Russ kind of went from being supportive to writing letters for Jim, suggesting that Jim would never turn a blind eye. Again, none of us were saying that Jim Jordan at the time was what he was not the direct report. Russ Hellickson was taking this to admit.
Yeah, leadership is the top. Russ Hellickson's the head coach. Andy Geiger's the athletic director. Yeah.
We all know it happened, and why someone decides that they're going to deny. You got to look at their character. At the end of the day, that's the piece we struggle with the most, is where are they now? You watch the film. Let's go to that film. If you're those two guys and you watch that film and you don't jump forward and say, let's fix this, especially when you're in a position of power and have access to the highest office in the land, and you don't come forward and help us seek justice and get justice. Jordan's on the record saying, if this happened, these guys could get justice. Well, where's he at? Where's he at? Once you choose that path, it's hard for you to step back and be truthful. But again, I've told folks, I look at the positive. Listen, I went to 2 Olympic Games with Russ Hellickson as a spotter for NBC News or NBC Sports. I treasured my experience at Ohio State. both as an undergrad and graduate student. So I not everything was horrible, right?
Right.
But if we don't address the horrible and work to make it better, then who are we? And that's that's where I choose to focus.
I got two more questions for you, Mike. How have you found maybe new purpose since the film's come out?
It's provided the film has provided me with some peace, and one of the things that one of the reasons I'm doing this interview, which again I appreciate you taking the time, is it's therapeutic, and it's important.
Yes.
So the purpose, one of the things I pull out of this is there's a platform to have these kind of conversations so that parents are aware. What do you look for as a parent? What do you look for as a student, as an athlete? Having open conversations with young kids, and you got to start early. There's again, Strauss was doing this to kids that were preteen.
So what do you look for? Like, what advice can you give to those listening or watching?
Well, something looks wrong. Speak. Where there's smoke,
Okay.
there's fire, right? And I think it's hard for folks to do. Is walk up to someone who you believe is grooming. They're when you see something, say something. Also, when you, as an adult, you got to have conversations with your kids about what's okay and what's not okay. You never let a student or a child. You got to keep your eye on them all the time. There are predators all over the place. And Frank, one of the scary things about today that wasn't necessarily the case when we were growing up is the internet and these social media and what these kids are seeing online and the predators that are coming after them. Tim Tebow, a couple months ago, I was watching a podcast where he cited a study by the FBI that identified over 100,000 IP addresses where that IP address was downloading child pornography of kids under the age of 12. So we got to educate ourselves. We got to educate our kids, and we've got to put systems in place that help us identify, recognize, and prevent these kinds of crimes. I mean, it's like I said, it's a crime as old as time, and the more conversation we have about it, the better.
Going back to the film, it makes me think about here were all these athletes through these years who were being sexually abused by Strauss, and then all of a sudden it's not an athlete that actually breaks through and actually gets the attention of the university. Like, how did that, how was that the case?
Number one, that you mentioned, one of the initial complaints came from a non-athlete, Stephen Schneider-Hill. Mm-hmm. He had gone into the student health center, so it wasn't just student athletes that Strauss was abusing. He was doing this at the student health center as well. And Schneider-Hill was mature enough at the time to address it, file complaint. When the university came back and said, well, this is, it must be a misunderstanding. Schneider-Hill said to the administrator, Ted Grace, at the time, well, I'll drop the charges if you tell me that this hasn't happened to anyone else. Turns out it happened 3 days before to someone else. And Schneider-Hill so Grace is intentionally lying to him. And Stephen had the gumption had the gumption to say, put it in writing. And so he said the minute he said put it in writing, the phone went dead, silent. and then Grace did say, okay, I'll put it in writing, and sent him a letter. That was 1996. If Stephen Schneider-Hill doesn't have that document in 2018, the university may have, not found documents, let's just say. And so, yeah, Stephen, the fact that he wasn't an athlete, I think, again, the power dynamic, we needed Strauss to approve us to compete. And, you know, and we're complaining to our coaches, and we're getting the feedback we're getting is, sorry, deal with it. Actually, Hellickson at one point says that he went to the university and complained, and, you know, was getting nothing but, you know, deal with it. So he would come back to the guys and tell them his thoughts were just man up, you know, get through it. So you just so that the Snyder Hill piece is important, but then the other piece I think is important is the female fencing coach. She was the only female coaching a male team. She was getting complaints from her athletes that Strauss was doing unnecessary general exams. She took it to the university over 10 years. It's in writing. I mean, there's documents to support that she was complaining for over 10 years. And the university didn't do any investigation. They didn't pull any athlete in to say, you know, to say what's going on. Nothing. It was just, again, why and how they covered it up is just crazy.
You know, as I'm sitting there watching it, does Strauss have something on the university? Right.
Frank, it looks that way.
I mean, just watching it, you know, through my lens, I'm questioning, well, how can this continue to keep happening with nothing happening?
I don't think there's one particular thing, but, you know, Strauss was the foremost expert on anabolic steroids in the world, frankly. He was, you know, Ben Johnson, Carl Lewis in 1998 or 1988, when that scandal went down with, you know, with steroids, and it was one of the biggest stories at the time. Strauss was on Nightline during that. I remember vividly, you know, Ted Koppel brings him on, and he's talking about anabolic steroids. So, you know, there's that piece, you know, that was at that time, you know, that's, you know, when anabolic steroids in the mid 70s was becoming an issue within college athletics. And here you got Strauss, that's the expert. You know, was he aware of impropriety, you know, stuff going on within the athletic department, within the football program? You know, I know some high-profile former Ohio State athletes that came in, you know, 6'1", 205 pounds, and left to 6'1", 255 pounds. So, so was there, you know, was that a piece of it? The film addresses it. Was it the only reason? I don't think so. But yeah, you do wonder. There's certainly an element where you look at this and you're like, what did he have on these guys? Because it's one administrator after another that turns a blind eye. And actually, there's one document in particular I look at where they use the word unfounded rumors 3 times in one paragraph. Unfounded. And you're like, damn, they must really want this to be unfounded.
But it seemed like they may have feared him.
Why they chose to ignore this for so long. And then when he leaves, Frank, the crazy thing is it starts really coming to a head in '96. And then eventually Strauss was dismissed with honors. In other words, he moves on, not fired, no negativity, just like a Catholic priest. Just push him off, and maybe he goes to and actually he went off campus and opened up a medical clinic off campus, and he was soliciting patients in the student newspaper for his off-campus clinic, even though the university pushed him out. They pushed him out. They gave him emeritus status, which is an honor, and then he continues to do what he's doing off campus, and then he moves to California, and he's opens up a clinic out there, and God knows, you know, who he was affecting there.
So keep your eyes peeled, keep your ears open, and pay attention, right? Because we're in a society today where we're so distracted, it seems like, and things just seem to fly under the radar. You had mentioned, Mike, one last thing. You had mentioned talking about this has been therapeutic for you. And I know that you and I have talked about the importance of mental health also. What have you been doing recently to help yourself, you know, because this has got to be a lot of weight on your shoulders, my man.
I have a therapist that I talk to once a week, and I've done that for several years now. I encourage everyone, frankly. I think we all need therapy. We go to the gym to work out and exercise our body, but I think we again, the stigma of having mental health issues has got to, that's the other thing that I look to in this is that you're now seeing elite athletes talk about mental health. We're all on a spectrum, depression, bipolar, whatever it may be. Some of us struggle more so than others, but it's the human experience. And so, what we've seen over the last decade and a half, I think, as it relates to, being more comfortable having those conversations is another positive step for humanity. The last 7 years, being the guy that blew the whistle in Columbus, Ohio, as you can imagine, is not, when you're dealing with an $8 billion public institution that has a $9 billion endowment, there's a lot of folks that are, don't want to necessarily be associated with the negativity that comes with being a whistleblower. And so that's, that has an effect. It's been something I've had to, work through and understand and be okay with. And again, I go back to the film. I think it's given me some peace, because now, what I say to folks is, where are you now? Did you watch the film? Where are you now? Those that threw stones at me in 2018 and attacked my family and friends, and where are you now? Where are you now? Did you watch the film? Did you see the reports of 170 cases of reported rapes? Where are you now? And so I say that to folks: watch the film and tell me where you're at now.
Have you had anybody apologize?
I've had a lot of support. When I came out in 2018, again, I wasn't healthy at that time, mental health wise. I was bipolar. And actually the bipolar, the mania, contributed to the ability, let's call it, the audacity to actually scream. And I was screaming, figuratively screaming on a daily basis about this. For me to take the stand that I took in 2018, I had to scream. It definitely, I recognized that my mania at the time was contributed to the whirlwind, or the trauma. Let's say that. I mean, we had, Frank. I could. There's a whole book to write about the fallout and the attacks that I took, and not just personally, but at my family. In 2018, there were a lot of people that wanted, that were taking shots. In 2025, I didn't receive one negative thought, not one. And there were a lot of guys that I supported over the years that took shots at me, from supporting them, through my companies, CF Athletic and Cage Fighter and MMA Elite. I mean, I had sponsored many athletes and multiple careers. I also had a business in the early 2000s. We were the first NIL program in Ohio State. I had 15 former athletes under contract and was doing, licensed jerseys and bobblehead dolls and novelty products. So I've always been in the athlete advocacy business. I was NIL before NIL, And again, some of the folks that I supported, didn't support me. And but here we are, 2025, and especially right after the film came out, it was just overwhelmingly positive. And so that I'm grateful, and that's what I'm choosing to focus on. And we're just getting started, Frank. This conversation is important to have, and so when you talk about purpose, that's one of the things that this is important conversation to have, and it's definitely given me purpose. It's a piece of what I hope to be contributing to as we move forward.
Well, Mike, I tell you what, man, it's a unbelievable documentary. I commend you, and you're a leader. You're courageous, and to fire up the troops and to get your team and your brothers involved and to make this happen. Another beatitude is blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, right? And you've been persecuted, my friend, but you're doing it for the right reasons. I commend you. Keep fighting the good fight. Any last words?
Frank, like I said, I just thank you for reaching out, and means a lot, to especially in the wrestling community, to have your support, and it's we all, you and I know a lot of guys in this, that are involved in this situation. I mean, the wrestlers. That's one of the things I'm proud about, is it took a bunch of wrestlers to lead. It took a bunch of wrestlers at Michigan to lead. And so that's one of the things I'm proud about for our sport, is that when it came time to step up, a lot of guys did. Now, some didn't. And that's tragic in and of itself. But I truly appreciate you taking the time to have this discussion, because not everyone wants to have this discussion. And that's leadership. Again, thank you for being that voice. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for the opportunity, and best wishes always, my friend.
Absolutely, my friend. Back at you. And thanks again for coming on. Michael, have a wonderful day, and I look forward to following where this purpose takes you. Take care.
Thank you, Frank. Best wishes always.
Thank you, Michael, for joining us today, and thank you for watching. Until next time on The People Business, have a great day.